want your notebook. There's more.
Welcome to CN Live, Season 8, Episode 6, Mideast on Fire. I'm Joe Lauria, the Editor-in-Chief of Consortium News.
And I'm Elizabeth Voss.
The nightmare unleashed on the Middle East by Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump is about to enter its sixth day. In the United States, an attempt by Congress to do its constitutional duty to grant permission to Trump to attack was cut short by Republicans in the Senate. This is a thoroughly illegal war, lacking both U.S. congressional and UN Security Council authorization. Iran was a threat to no one. U.S. intelligence said it was not working on a nuclear weapon. It had no plans to attack its neighbors. Meanwhile, U.S. vassals around the world are supporting this insane U.S.-Israeli war that has now affected 9 countries with casualties mounting. The war has spread far from the main theater, as earlier today, a U.S. submarine sank an Iranian frigate near Sri Lanka, killing 86 Iranian sailors. With us tonight to discuss this madness is journalist Patrick Henningsen. Patrick is a geopolitical analyst, a journalist, founder of the 21st Century Wire. Patrick, thanks for joining us on this awful time. I want to ask you about this. You know, sometimes this really is a nightmare, and I have to remind myself that it's really happening. It's really somehow hard to believe, because Netanyahu even admitted a couple of days ago that he tried for 40 years to do this. He's been lying about Iran for 40 years, having ballistic missiles to hit New York, he said in 2013 at the UN, for example, and that they were 2 weeks away from a bomb. He's been trying 40 years, and he finally has got the man to do it. And I wonder, it seems like he got the fanatical government, Donald Trump. Why did the U.S., I'm going to ask you, why do you think U.S. presidents have denied Netanyahu for so long until now?
Well, I think thanks, Joe, for inviting me on to talk about
Sure.
this. It's very unnerving and disturbing to see how things are unfolding. Certainly for I think for everybody, anyone who has a conscience and who cares about global stability and the international system and avoiding a third world war, it's disturbing. For everybody else, they seem to be caught up in the war hysteria. And the hype and all the things that we are so used to, unfortunately, in the United States, especially around Washington and our mainstream media. But I think the reason what's different here is I don't think there's ever been a U.S. administration, and also this is culminating at a period where the rise of the Israeli lobby and specifically AIPAC and being involved in directly funding congressmen and senators in recent years as well, and the moves that were made by Trump's first term, the first Trump administration, really set the table for all of the things we're seeing today. The unilateral withdrawal of the Joint Comprehensive Nuclear Agreement for Iran, the JCPOA, the withdrawal of that by Trump's first term created the conditions and created the narrative, if you will, that Iran was working on a nuclear weapon because there was no international agreement in place to hold them to account. Of course, there was, but Trump withdrew from it. That was at the express orders of Benjamin Netanyahu's office at the time. But that was intentional. It was to create the situation. Everything that this Trump administration has done in its first and second term, and the Biden administration as well. We can talk about that separately, but all of these things have been to create a situation, an optimal situation, and a narrative that could somehow justify what we're seeing right now. And the penetration of Israel into this U.S. administration is unprecedented. You have a situation where the entire diplomatic corps of the United States, as we once knew it, has been dismissed, as well as any moderates within the military have been purged. And now you have, really a lot of religious fanatics, religious extremists, including the defense secretary himself. So every single pick, and I've been saying this since last inauguration, every single cabinet pick Every single pick, and that has to do with national security or foreign policy, and then not even excluding the HSS secretary, but every single pick was handpicked by the transition team and the Israeli lobby. And the transition team for Trump was Howard Lutnick and Jared Kushner. So the Israel lobby had to okay every single person, and they even intervened to replace people. And if you look at you understand politics extremely well, Joe, so you'll know, looking back at history in the U.S., that it's very unusual for a president to raid safe seats in the House of Representatives from their own party and use that to fill cabinet positions that, quite frankly, could be filled by pretty much anybody. And you have to ask yourself, why is the Trump administration doing that? They pulled Elise Stefanik out of a seat in New York, which is a very valuable seat for a Republican in the House, and maybe not easy to get, and to serve as UN ambassador. And when they saw that that was going to collapse in terms of being able to automatically replace her, or come up good in the next congressional election, she was moved out of the UN position and then swapped with Mike Waltz and all these other, Marco Rubio, out of a safe Senate seat as Secretary of State. Every single one of these, from Mike Pompeo and Mike Waltz, Rubio, Stefanik, they all have one thing in common, that the Israeli lobby has been grooming them since they even got into the congressional or Senate race in the beginning of their political career. The lobby doesn't have that level of influence. It hasn't been grooming these people that are in academia, let's say, and other corridors, and maybe in the diplomatic corps, as much as they have congressmen and senators. That's why you're seeing this culmination, this crescendo, if you will, of Israeli influence with the Trump administration 2.0, providing now the optimum time and a completely supine administration, whereby the top two diplomats don't even have an official portfolio with the State Department, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. It's a property dealer from Long Island and the son-in-law of the president. And they're front running all, quote, negotiations in Ukraine, Russia, in Gaza, with Hamas and Israel, and of course with Iran and the United States. So, and it's been a disaster at every single juncture. And so what they did was, in multiple occasions now, have used negotiations as a deception tactic in order to create a facade to wait for the right time for a sneak attack. This has not been done once. It's not been done twice. It was done with Hezbollah and Nasrallah. It was done with Hamas and Israel, with the strike in Doha against the Hamas delegation. It was also done with luring Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes in Trump's first term to Baghdad for, quote, negotiations, assassinating them. It was done twice with Ukraine and Russia. While high-level negotiations were going on, major attacks against Russia's nuclear deterrent, and including an attack and attempt on President Putin's life. So these are dirty gutter tactics that are stock and trade of Israel, but not normally of the United States of America. Being a superpower, why would they have to come down to the gutter level of Israeli dirty tactics of running fake negotiations and using that as cover for a sneak attack? Because that would just destroy your credibility as any kind of a broker, as a superpower. There would be no way that you could be trusted to mediate or to sort of lead any major multilateral negotiations or agreements at that point. And that's exactly what's happened here. And look at the result. You will always get war. You will always get war when you employ these tactics. And these are Israeli tactics. So what is sadly, and I'm this is not a hyperbolic statement, but Israel, in terms of their government and their methods, their rhetoric, their tactics, has merged with this White House, and there's no difference between them, and this is why you're seeing what you're seeing right now. So it's a long-winded answer, Joe, to your question, but
That's
it's
what I
hard.
wanted
It defies normal analysis. I mean, but that's the best I can surmise.
That was pretty good. I've been saying that Trump is so irrational that you can't rationally analyze him, but that was a very good explanation. And we were worried about John Bolton those days. And of course, this term is so much Worse. Now, Biden, you mentioned Biden. Let's get that out of the way because he never made any effort to restore what his former, boss, Barack Obama, actually had some courage to stand up to the Israelis and the Saudis and did that deal with the Russians and the Chinese. We forget that. He worked diplomatically with Russia and China to get that deal. And what Biden made no effort to go back to the nuclear deal. But and why do you think that is? Other than APEC pressure, why didn't he try? But at least he didn't start this goddamn war that we're seeing right now. So every president would be dragged by Netanyahu, and then they would say, no, they're not going to do this because they saw what we're seeing right now, what the consequences of such a war would be.
Yeah, I think if Biden had a second term, we would probably got this war one way or
You
another
do, yeah.
because
Mhm.
Tony Blinken was the Secretary of State, and that is
Right.
literally Israel, and he's not even shy about his loyalty. At the beginning of post October 7th, he stood up there in Israel and said, "Me, Tony Blinken, as a Jew."
Right.
And so he used his identity politics to establish that he was not going to be an objective party in sort of this war, this genocide, which has become a genocide in Gaza. So I think, the anti-war, what Trump did in his first term was to commandeer the populist anti-war sentiments in the U.S. and the independent vote, and that helped him get elected. And I think he achieved a lot in terms of advancing the ball down the field to militarize Ukraine, and
Yes.
certainly he achieved a lot in recognizing the Golan Heights and Israel's right to Judea and Samaria, as they call it, the West Bank, and didn't really do much to improve that sort of situation at all. But the Biden's term basically was a laissez-faire policy with Israel, whatever they want, unconditional military support, and that cost the Democrats the election. Actually, it did hurt them badly, and that's not acknowledged by a lot of Democrats, but the numbers certainly show that. What he did, and that the MAGA movement could play opposition during the Biden administration. We don't want another needless war against Iran. And you have Tulsi Gabbard doing her whole pantomime of I'm an anti-war activist and I'm against the senseless regime change wars and doing her whole act. And J.D. Vance saying, "Oh, we shouldn't be sending our weapons to Ukraine and our money, and we need to take care of America first." But they needed Trump to take that, kill that populist anti-war independent movement, kill it, and then go into full military mode. And I think more aggressive and more caustic even than the Bush administration. This is a level up from neocons because, Joe, even the neocons of Dick Cheney and Bush and Rumsfeld fame at least had the decency and the respect for the public to fake the intelligence and to turn it into a massive vaudeville
That's right.
theater for us that lasted for a year and a half. Actually, for years, if you count the whole Farrago in the late '90s, and which Scott Ritter had documented and so forth.
Right.
But at least they had less contempt for the public, that they had to at least put the effort in to fake it, to fake the intelligence. Trump holds the public in such utter contempt that he feels that no, that we're just going to make up half a dozen different talking points as a pretext for this, and then we're just going to say we need to go and we need to attack them, and then it's death and destruction and the shock doctrine that we see right now, without not even pretending to have a reason for it. The nuclear question is a joke. That's, I mean, that's not. And then it was the peaceful protesters, and the 30,000, 50,000, 70,000, whatever. Iranian protesters need to rise up and take this moment in history, Trump said, literally inciting violence. And we know that there are, U.S. backed, U.S. intelligence and Israeli intelligence backed agent provocateurs on the ground, and I saw evidence of that myself in Tehran, which 2 weeks ago, which we can talk about. But
Yes.
but so now, and then it's the missiles. Oh, we can't have those missiles are threatening U.S. troops in the region. So that's all happening, and then it's back to enrich uranium, and Magic Man Steve Witkoff is doing his fake shuttle diplomacy. And then while this is going on, yeah, there's supposed to be high-level negotiations, and it was supposed to be about the nuclear question. But Iran was never developing a nuclear weapon. Everybody knows that, who's in the know in the intelligence community in the United States. And the JCPOA was just double insurance to make sure that they wouldn't do it in the future anyway. But even during that agreement, it was pretty clear that they weren't developing a nuclear weapon. They're very transparent in access. So there wasn't even a need for that, but yet Iran still went through the motions. They still wanted to show the international community that they'll leave the door open for diplomacy. So that in international relations, which is what I studied in postgraduate level, that's the behavior of a rational normative power. And rational normative power will go through diplomacy and in the hopes that there might be an off ramp to signal to the other mid tier or even superpowers that they're a rational actor and that they can do business with them. They can get into joint agreements with them, and so the United States is not a normative power any longer. They're a rogue state. They've disregarded all international law treaties and agreements. And what Biden did as well is also let all the nuclear agreements lapse between the U.S. and Russia. Trump did the same. And so did previous administrations. I will give Obama some credit. Certainly, it's hard to do that on many levels, but I will give him some credit that they did put in the effort and bring some of these agreements together and had some dialogue. But I mean, it's horrendous, the Obama's relationship with Russia. That was preparing the war for the groundwork for the Ukraine war, of course. But on this point, this is all about Israel and the U.S.'s position in the region, all around the Gulf. All of those bases, it's all to create a security envelope for Israel. Now we knew after True Promise 1, 2, now True Promise 3 and 4, you see that activated, that defense array for Israel. And all of those Arab countries have been told, we're here to protect you. The U.S. is providing protection for you, but what they're doing is drawing fire to those Arab countries, and this is now this is going to be a reevaluation of the United States' footprint in the region, and I think everybody's going to be involved in that reevaluation, no matter what the rhetoric coming out of Washington is, which is quite disjointed and kind of they're making it up as they go along, and statements by Rubio and these other nonsensical statements that you've probably seen that are quite extraordinary, saying that we have no control over Israel. They were going to strike first, so then we had to strike first because we can't tell them what to do. I mean, U.S. is the superpower, I thought, but apparently not. So, I mean, this has changed. A lot is going to change as a result of what's happened and what's unfolded over the last week.
So many points there. Just quickly, you say Israel vetted everybody in the cabinet. Well, they must have known that Tulsi Gabbard was a phony, so they let that go in through. Rubio saying he tried to explain on Monday to reporters what imminent means. That it was an imminent attack coming because we knew that when Israel hit them, and when we hit them, they were going to hit back. That's not imminent. That's your attack was imminent against them. And they obviously, everyone in the world knows this. And this knows, as you just said, that they weren't getting a bomb and that this was a naked, unprovoked aggression. The worst crime, according to Nuremberg principles in the world, is this war of aggression. There's not a clearer example than this. Even in many ways worse than the first Gulf War. The Bush Sr. got a Security Council resolution and congressional authorization. So it was a legal war. As I disagree with it, but many people did. George W. Bush, who said that these are Trump's worse than the neocons, they at least went to the UN and didn't get the resolution and did it anyway, which was illegal. But they did get Congress to pass some resolution authorizing it. And they spoke to the American people and made a case. Trump did none of that. He has no case, no intelligence, not fake intelligence, no intelligence, nothing. So it's just it's so extraordinary what's happening. But you raised really the important point I want to underscore and ask you again about, which is the Gulf Arab states. They hosted the U.S. there as the umbrella, and they were able to build this fabulously wealthy places like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, etc. gambling, prostitution, Bahrain, even to Manama. Was all because the Americans were there, and they have not protected them. So, what is the point of having the Americans there? And when this is over, they may be asked to leave. Will they leave is another issue. Because we saw that the Gulf Arab all said that we will not allow the United States to use our territory. Some MBS, Mohammed bin Salman also was saying that, and yet the Washington Post reports he, as much as Netanyahu, was pressing Trump to do this. So I want to ask you about what's the future of the U.S. troops in those countries, but also maybe Elizabeth wants to weigh in on this too. Trump's decision to do this. Now, the decision had already been made, apparently, right? But he did not look comfortable going before the cameras in Mar-a-Lago with his golfing cap on there to tell the world that we're starting a goddamn unbelievable, dangerous war. And I wonder what were the pressures on him, whether there was any kind of material, let's say, that Israel had that they may have hinted that could become public about Trump.
Well, I mean, first of all, you have to well, I'll get to that in a minute. On the Tulsi Gabbard point,
Yes.
she was groomed. She was recognized and spotted by Miriam Adelson at the beginning of her congressional
Is that right?
career. Oh yes, oh yes. And Shmuley Botish and the usual suspects. So they were all over her because she was a talent. She had a lot of appeal. She's good looking. She has a great military background. So she ticked all the boxes for a successful U.S. politician. And she's a woman, and she's quite forthright in her opinions. So they intervened early to try to shape her. And you'll see a lot of these people will come in with big donations when these people first run for office, and they're quite young and impressionable, and they just really want to get into office first. And to do that, you sometimes have to have relationships and make deals with people like that. And then after October 7th, it was very clear where Tulsi Gabbard was, which she suddenly became a sort of main talking head on Fox News, and went on Sean Hannity immediately to decry the scourge of radical Islam. That was her position, and from there, absolutely lockstep with Israel. And so she was clearly told that if she plays her cards right, she'll have a position in the Trump administration in 2024. And of course, she was given a prominent position there. So she's quite malleable and quite a adept political shapeshifter. No principles whatsoever, but except for her career, clearly. And I think the reason why her is DNI, after Trump threw under the bus, not once but twice over the course of the last year, when she presented a comprehensive intelligence assessment that said Iran was not pursuing a nuclear weapon, and Trump says, "I don't care what she says," and made all these bad remarks about her, and she just kept her mouth shut. And rather than speaking up for herself or resigning, which is what the honorable thing to do at that point would be, to resign and have the populist wave supporting you for that, which she would have had, she went and she's running errands for Stephen Miller down in Georgia, digging up dirt against Trump's enemies regarding the 2020 election. I mean, it's humiliating for Tulsi Gabbard, but she's groveling because she was promised by the Israeli lobby that if she plays her cards right, she will get a look in on the ticket for 2028, and she would be a likely vice presidential running mate for J.D. Vance. Probably that would make the most demographic sense, if you will, in terms of the polling and the balance of the ticket. And so we'll see. But I'm pretty sure, well, the lobby would promise everybody a look in for 2020. That's how you get loyalty in Washington, as you well know, Joe. But what's more concerning about the fact that Trump did not consult Congress for this, and this is very important, and this should be the basis for impeachment or for any other legal action going forward, is that he didn't consult Congress. He left Congress out of the loop, even though everybody in Washington knew this was coming, including Chuck Schumer, which is why he dragged his feet on this vote, which could have happened before the war, by the way. And Chuck Schumer said, "Oh, I want to vote on that, but let's do that next week." He knew exactly what was coming last Friday. Okay, so, but what's scandalous about this, Joe, is that if you consider the United States and Israel are completely joined on military operations, one is not moving without the other, with the full support, the full knowledge, and being briefed on the military level. So, but our lawmakers are not brought into that process under the Trump administration. But yet Netanyahu is briefing his intelligence committees in the Knesset about U.S. operations. So the Knesset gets first look on U.S. operations in the region, but our congressmen and senators don't get anything. And that to me is a constitutional crisis that's unprecedented in the history of the United States of America. We don't have anything to compare this to in terms of not just the penetration of Israel. And by the way, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner should register as foreign agents under FARA. That should be absolutely required legally, because they're literally attending Israeli lobby functions during negotiations in America, pledging this and that for Israel, with all of the top sort of stakeholders present. I mean, that should be, you have to recuse yourself under normal political conditions if you're doing any of that during high-level negotiations with the Middle East and so forth. That's normal. That's acceptable under this current government. And there's no Democrats willing to hold them to account or hold their feet to the fire in any of this, because everybody is absolutely terrified of falling foul of the lobby, and also and the mainstream media, they're working together with the lobby, and if they want to target and destroy anybody's career, it's not difficult. They can do it in a matter of hours if they want. And then you're on the outs. Look at Matt Gaetz. He was ousted. This is the future Speaker of the House, was ousted out of his position through a bait and switch, promising him Attorney General position. And then when he accepted it, he's vacating his House seat. And then they bring in an old sex scandal that was an Israeli sting on Matt Gaetz that was already put to bed, but the media ran with it. And then the Trump administration sidelines him for that pick. They bring in the real pick, which was Pam Bondi, and her job was to cover up the Epstein files. Pretty clear. She's a former Israeli lobbyist with her previous firm, Ballard and Associates. And then Matt Gaetz's seat gets filled by who? Randy Fine. The ultimate Zionist stooge in Congress. And so that's job done. You have the one maverick who voted against the anti-Semitism bill, Matt Gaetz, and he's out of government. I mean, but that just goes to show you what's going on in the U.S. government, the amount of meddling, the amount of interference in our political system from this foreign lobby. It's just mind-boggling. I mean, Russia is not interfering in our system. It's clearly Israel's more than interfering. They are dominating, steering, and completely controlling, at least on the foreign policy front, completely controlling the United States government right now.
Elizabeth.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, great point. And a great point about Tulsi Gabbard. I'm glad you're bringing her up, because it's been a while since anybody, I think, has really noticed or talked about her and all this. But there are reports going back to the recent events in Iran, there are reports that the strike on that elementary school in Manab was a so-called double tap strike, like we've seen in Gaza over and over and over again. And I wanted to get your take on how Gaza has set this precedent for what we're seeing now in Iran. It's a new kind of war.
Well, the difference with Gaza is, and the difference with what we're looking at, which is actually frightening, is that there's no restraint when it comes to targeting densely populated civilian areas, or any kind of attempt to deconflict or to avoid civilian casualties, women and children, etc. There's no attempt to do that. And then worse, after 2 years of a carpet bombing, the most densely populated place on the planet in Gaza, there's no one that will restrain Israel or the United States. And they're working together. They have a joint operations room, U.S. and Israel. It's based in Israel. It's with U.S. Pentagon staff. So this isn't. We shouldn't be playing this game of good cop, bad cop, oh, Israel's just doing its security to defend itself. No, the United States is more than coordinating. They are part of the operation. It's joint operations with regards to Gaza, and the British as well. Maybe not to the same level as the U.S., but still very much involved on that level. And I could say with the French and the Germans are also deeply involved in that as well. But no one's who's come to restrain Israel. So they've demonstrated in South Lebanon as well. Hundreds of thousands of homes have been destroyed. Whole city blocks have been bombed in a densely populated city like Beirut. And this is unprecedented. This is unprecedented. Usually they're before decades of targeted strikes, assassinations, maybe a little collateral damage. We're targeting the terrorists, the usual canard. But now it's like we're targeting the terrorists, but we'll take out the whole city block and tough luck. So the reason is, so there's no restraint. And the other reason why we're seeing more of this now is because there has been no attempt by any other countries, by the media, by any of the top minds in politics to realize that the term terrorism has been more than abused. And one can only conclude at this point that it's a label that's applied in order to remove any expectation of due process or observation of any legal norms, be they domestic or international, any treaties, and just say, well, you can just write it off to collateral damage. We're fighting the war on terror. So this is a byproduct of the global war on terror that's now been refocused. So if you look at Hamas and Hezbollah, and I'm going to make this point because this is fundamental, that if you label the political wing of Hamas or Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, you don't have to talk to them. You don't have to negotiate them. That gives Israel, the U.S., and its allies carte blanche to target them for elimination and within their legal framework. But international law recognizes those organizations as having a right to exist, and their armed wing as a right to resist as an armed liberation struggle against occupation. And Palestine is legally recognized as occupied. So is South Lebanon. Okay. And Israel does not have the right to level whole villages or to drop leaflets and tell people, which is what they're doing right now in Lebanon, again, in South Lebanon. They don't have the right to do that under any aspect of any law or any provision internationally. But with the U.S. And the Britain and France under the war on terror, they have all proscribed these organizations. The EU just proscribed the IRGC 3 weeks ago as a terrorist organization. The timing of that was so suspect. And when I saw that, I got very worried. When I saw that, I knew that I had a limited window to go to Iran, that the war was indeed going to start very soon. But that's so there would be no dialogue. It's another excuse not to have any dialogue or exchange or negotiations with Iran. They can just claim that, oh, they're all terrorists. They've never attacked Europe. You know, the RGC is clearly not a terrorist organization. And then the canard that gets repeated that Iran is the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Well, excuse me, but didn't President Trump invite al-Sharar, a.k.a. Mohammed al-Julani, into the Oval Office, the founder of al-Qaeda in Syria, the former deputy head of ISIS, for a selfie in the Oval Office with the President of the United States? And all he had was glowing things to say about this terrorist. What a great guy he is, how handsome he is, spraying perfume and cologne on him. I mean, this is like a ritual humiliation for the United States, for its veterans, for it really, but it does show what a farce the entire global war on terror was. It was a joke. And it's the Afghan occupation and war was a farce, as of course we know the Iraq war was, but a devastating farce nonetheless for the people who lived there. But so that terrorism element, I think, has gotten out of control. And I'm horrifying to say this, but you know, the average American believes that, and they therefore back the military operations because they think these are radical Muslims. They think that the mullahs, that the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is a terror mastermind. Excuse me, but Iran was fighting ISIS on the ground. General Soleimani was fighting ISIS on the ground with the PMUs. The Iraqi Hashd al-Shabi, they were fighting ISIS, and Trump assassinated him. and then labeled him a terrorist. So anyone fighting or resisting Israeli aggression or U.S. aggression or infiltration, these were clearly U.S. and Israeli proxies and NATO proxies, all of these armed jihadist groups that converged on Syria and Iraq. It's very clear at this point, and a lot of that is declassified. It is available, and one can make that conclusion. But the Ayatollah issued a fatwa prohibiting the development of nuclear weapons. That's the guy. They just killed him. Now you have, because Trump assassinated him, now the conditions are open for more likely or probable that Iran will pursue a nuclear weapon because of what Trump and Israel have done. So none of this conforms to any logic in terms of the narrative that's being shoved down our throats by this government and our media. It's the opposite. I've never seen the level of doublespeak that we're seeing right now, the inversion of reality, and doing it on the fly in such a ad hoc manner. I mean, I've never seen anything like it in my life. We've seen some things, haven't we? I mean, the last 30 years, but.
Elizabeth, thank you. Terrorism, it's completely upside down. These groups, as you say, Hezbollah, even Hamas, to the extent they helped it, and Qatar gave so much more money, a U.S. ally to Hamas, with the knowledge of Israel, by the way, then, and the Shia militia in Iraq, or the Houthis, which were not originally aligned with Iran, but were pushed into a closer alliance with them. These are all militias, resistance groups, fighting militaries. This is not terrorism. Right? You could disagree with them. For example, Hezbollah, Amal, of course, and Hezbollah only was developed to fight the occupation of Lebanon. This is a fighting occupation, just like Hamas, where ISIS occupied people. The exact opposite. They weren't fighting an occupation. They were occupying territory in Syria and Iraq, for example. They went into Europe and attacked Paris. They really threatened Europe. Nobody from Iran, any group, did anything in Europe like that. So, and who supported ISIS and Al-Qaeda, we know. Not only Saudi Arabia and Qatar, but United States to overthrow Assad. You know, we have that leaked John Kerry conversation in 20 hours, go back to this 2015 on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. He met with Syrian exiles, and he says, we were seeing ISIS advancing on Damascus. They were going to take Assad, and then Russia intervened. So he explained that ISIS was, they were on the side with ISIS.
And MEK,
so
Joe, the MEK, the Mujahideen
Yeah.
al-Haq, that's a terrorist organization. They killed American
US
soldiers.
designated it.
They deprescribed them so that they could open the floodgates for money into the coffers of U.S. senators and congressmen, and
Rudy
even
Giuliani, too, by the way.
Rudy Giuliani was on their payroll as well. So that's a terrorist organization that's backed and managed by U.S. intelligence right now. They're decamped in Albania, and they deploy them and use them for all sorts of things, all sorts of levels of warfare, cyber warfare, online troll farms, but also radicals and carrying out terrorist attacks inside Iran. That's terrorism. There's no contest who the #1 state sponsor of terror is on this planet. It's the United States of America and its allies, and Israel and the Gulf states are funding it a lot of the time. So, I mean, but this talking point is used to justify the decapitation of heads of state, the murder of whole lines of government officials. I mean, that's the Israeli tactic: kill all potential leaders, so there's no functioning government. I mean, they're very open about this, and that's all under the aegis of terrorism. And as you said, Hezbollah, that's the militia of South Lebanon, would not even exist if not for the Israeli occupation of South Lebanon. So, I mean, you couldn't make it up, honestly.
And there would be no defense of Lebanon if that didn't exist, which the Lebanese army is a joke. But they have taken a beating, Hezbollah. This is a completely insane greater Israel project. Ben-Gurion is dancing in his grave now because this is what they envisioned. And it went on slow motion for so many decades. A little piece of land there and there, but now it's full-blown ethnic cleansing, full-blown. And so many things I want to say. the larger picture, but which is, I think, greater Israel and greater America, by the way. This is a BRICS war for the United States. But let's put that aside for a minute. The U.S. apparently is working with the Kurds now in the north. I just saw a headline before we went on that the CIA is giving small arms to these Iranian Kurdish militia that are over the border in Iran. Now, apparently, the IRGC is moving its ground troops to the border with Iraq. This is where the battle is going to happen because if they get in, and it happened last June, by the way, in the 12-day, so-called 12-day June war, the Kurds tried to interfere. Turkey warned the Iranians and they were stopped. So that's going to be a major ground battle there. If the Kurds can enter, then you have the MEK from I don't know if they're still operating from Iraq territory, as they did under Saddam. But then
No,
you
no,
have the
they're
Baluchis
yeah,
in the south. Yeah, the
yeah.
Baluchis in the south. So the Kurdish battle will be a major one. And then Trump's talking about he's not adverse to U.S. ground troops. They certainly won't be in the front line, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Kurdish troops advance and they start taking that U.S. will go in to occupy. This might be part of the plan there. But talk a little bit about to me about the Kurdish
Mm.
battle to come in on the Iraqi Iranian border.
Yeah, it's good you brought that up, Joe. And what I find extraordinary about that is that the leak on this coming from Natasha Bertrand from CNN, and I was just, and Clarissa Ward of all people was like blowing the whistle about this and saying how this could be problematic for the Trump administration, and so it really kind of. There's a lot going on there, Joe, that I'm
Yeah,
not sure what's going on. It could be a split within the CIA. Who knows? Could be some defectors in the media, perhaps. I don't know. But you correctly identify this as a flashpoint because what the real risk here is that would lead to not only a civil war in Iraq again, because without a doubt, the Hashd al-Shabi, the PMUs in Iraq, the Shiite dominated PMUs, they will be deployed into Iran to assist the Iranians without a doubt, and they'll happily be deployed by maybe 30,000 of them. So I don't think, and these are battle-hardened, very, very good fighting groups that defeated ISIS on the ground. And I think ISIS is a much stronger opponent than the Kurdish militias that are being used as U.S. stooges. I mean, I can't believe that any Kurdish group would want to be used as a tool of the United States especially after they've been thrown under the bus in Syria just in the last 6 months by the United States. So, oh, we're done with you, and that's the end of they threw them to the Al Qaeda Lions, the HTS Lions there, and that was the end of that. Turkey will not allow any kind of militarized, I think, Kurdish effort like that because that's going to send a
right.
bad signal about Turkey. So certainly you could see Turkey intervening in some way or another, definitely on the intelligence level, maybe more to assist the Iranians in that way. But definitely the PMUs from Iraq would definitely be involved to help carry some of the burden out in the sort of periphery of Iran. So, but the fact that this is being telegraphed, it's bad news for the Kurds because now they're being shown that they're openly being used as pawns by the Israelis and by the U.S. They've always been able to hide under the aegis of some sort of autonomous movement or something like that. But this idea that they have a right to take a piece out of 6 different countries just because of their ethnic nomadic origins is kind of patently what's a destabilizing threat to basically many different countries in the region, Iran being one of them. But that what I did realize as well when I visited Iran, which I didn't understand very well before, but you do understand when you arrive and you spend time in a country. Although I didn't spend a lot of time, I spent enough to learn that Iran is a massively ethnically diverse country, and there is no pure Persian. Okay, everybody is of mixed origin, whether it's part Pakistani, part Persian, or if you want to call it Iranian, or part Turk, or part Baluchi, or part Pashtuni, or part Arab, or part
Very.
Azeri, part Kurdish. But what they have, and what the United States doesn't recognize in the West, because we're marinated in our own propaganda, is they have a national identity. And that's what they're rallying under in Iran. And, they're very proud of their Islamic revolution because that's a huge, huge historic achievement. And even 47 years later, they're still very proud of what they've achieved in terms of post-Shah Iran, and a lot of things that they've improved and corrected, even under crippling sanctions and embargo. And so that's united as an Islamic republic. And it's important to see that it's in the name, republic.
Yep.
It's a Republican form of government. Every position is democratically elected from the top all the way down to the local precinct. They do have a supreme leader who's the religious leader who represents the spiritual life of the country, who's also the philosophic, intellectual leadership as well, and which diffuses conflicting and rival powers with other branches of government. I mean, from a design point of view in government, it's a very incredible, resilient system and it's very unique. And I think this, and they're fiercely independent as Iranians, even though all these people might identify with their ethnic origins individually, they're united as Iranians. And I don't think the West fully understand and appreciate that. And this is one of the reasons why we constantly underestimate them, and to think that just because we assassinate the supreme leader, that the country is going to fall to pieces, because in our eyes, the mullahs were ruling with an iron fist. And that if we just cut the head of the snake, that the house of cards will fall down and the people will embrace the freedom that they so have longed for, and the democratic green shoots will flourish at that point. I mean, that's the delusional Western idea. When I arrived during the National Day, which they're out on the street, 2 million at 8 a.m., 2 million in Tehran, all galvanized and in solidarity because they were under threat of the United States 2.5, 3 weeks ago. A U.S. attack was imminent. U.S. Naval assets were already positioned. And so it could have happened in a minute. And rather than that being a destabilizing factor in the political economy of Iran, it was a unifying factor. Clearly, I witnessed that with my own eyes. I reported that. That went viral. And of course, I got no end to the attacks and the accusations against me for a Western white man daring to show his face in the Muslim country and report what he can see with his own eyes. And many women uncovered, by the way, on the street, and not running in fear of their life from the mullahs. I mean, but why should they have to justify their existence, whether their women cover their head or not? It's just patently stupid. But this is the Western lens, if you will, that's used to evaluate whether a country or a government is legitimate or not in our eyes. But that's what I saw, Joe. And so
Yeah.
if the policy was decapitation, that was going to lead to, and I think people in Washington believe it. There's
can't
no
believe
way
that they
you
believe
will not get regime change. It's impossible because the country is united under those principles. And they're fiercely sovereign, fiercely independent, more so than a lot of other countries that I've been to, maybe any country, quite frankly. But you can't project your reality on that and think that there's going to be some regime change, renaissance, as a result of the pressure
I
you're
can't
putting
believe
on
that
them.
I can't believe that people in Washington believe that nonsense, that they think they're playing chess. When you kill the king, the game's over. No, that doesn't work like that. But what is working for them is what we were just talking about, is this upside down idea of who is the terrorist and who's actually defending against it. And this, if you say that to American people, they'll think you're bought off or you're a fool. That it was Iran that was fighting against ISIS and Al Qaeda. It was Iran that was defending, had saved Erbil from ISIS. It was Iran that was fighting against Al Qaeda in Syria, like to protect a secular system. And this, and that it's the U.S. and Israel and Saudi Arabia supporting the terrorists. And this is such an important point. Let me go to Elizabeth, and I do want to talk to you a lot more about your time in Iran, if you can, if you have the time.
Sure.
But Elizabeth.
Sure. I wanted to get your take on where this goes. Does it escalate to World War III? What's the likelihood of potential the use of nuclear weapons in your mind? Where do we go?
Well, I think, let's say not likelihood, let's just talk probability. The probability of the use of nuclear weapons has increased dramatically as a result of this. So, likelihood, That's anyone's speculation, but probability has gone up. And when you're talking about nuclear weapons, be they tactical or strategic, when the probability increases, that's the problem. That's something that people should be concerned about. Certainly, normally governments would be concerned about, and we have a whole host of conventions and agreements and mechanisms to prevent uh, that probability from raising. But yet, that's exactly what we're seeing now. And veiled threats have been made by Israel, by Netanyahu himself. If you follow his speeches, which one he recently gave in Hebrew, where he basically intimated that, I think it was about in the last 3 days, that if things go sour for us, then we will unleash a surprise, which they have no idea what's coming. I mean, that to me is a kind of a veiled threat by the Israelis. So, and again, it's the Israelis making these threats with an undeclared nuclear arsenal, supposedly to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. I mean, the whole thing is just back to front. And so I do think that's the nuclear blackmail issue. There's been many reports about that. Many people have mentioned this in the last 12 months, especially after the 12-day war, that Israel threatened the United States if they didn't, if they don't get involved, then Israel's going to use a nuke. So that is, I have no doubt that that type of nuclear blackmail is being done, whatever level that is. That could be in a personal conversation with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, with Netanyahu on December 29th, or the subsequent meeting in February. Those types of conversations, I mean, the transcripts of which were probably not available, but that's what you're dealing with. Okay. Now, at that point, if that happens, what is the international community going to do? Do you think anybody's going to step forward to restrain or censure Israel? I don't think so. I don't think so, because I know the United States won't. And if the U.S. won't, then no one else will as well. I mean, China and Russia will be upset and maybe condemn them at the UN Security Council, but that's about all they can do when you're dealing with nuclear powers. And Israel is a nuclear power who doesn't have any membership in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and doesn't allow for inspectors, doesn't even talk, has this policy of nuclear ambiguity. So one country on the planet is allowed to basically be an exception in a world where supposedly we're trying to prevent the non-proliferation of the most dangerous weapons of mass destruction. And then they're wielding it. Look at what they're doing conventionally. Look at what they did in Gaza. They're in the dock for genocide, and they've got an undeclared nuclear arsenal, and they're issuing veiled threats constantly. What's the problem we have in terms of the world stability and world peace? Well, it's Israel, clearly. It's not Iran. It's not Russia. Russia's a predictable normative power. China's a predictable. India and Pakistan, for all their faults, are very rational and predictable normative powers, and they both have a nuclear arsenal. Britain and the NATO countries are fairly restrained because the United States really runs with the British are nested under a U.S. nuclear umbrella. The French have an independent nuclear deterrent, but they're within NATO and they're somewhat answerable to the rest of their allies. What about Israel? Who are they answerable to? And so the ability to issue nuclear blackmail threats means that you don't have any control. Then that's a hegemon right there. Israel is a bona fide now hegemon, and they're openly talking about the Greater Israel Project, which you could call Pax Judaica in down the road, I guess. But the Greater Israel Project is not about having Jewish populated states in the Middle East, but having subservient governments and demilitarized subservient states surrounding Israel as it gradually expands its undeclared borders. Again, Israel is the only country in the world with undeclared borders and no constitution, and it's obvious why those two things exist, as we know. So yeah. I mean, there's a lot in that, of course, but that's the challenge that the international community faces here. It's it's a massive challenge because the United States is not going to intervene or restrain or do anything I mean, as Marco Rubio showed us this week, we can't do anything about Israel. We just have to go in with them and strike, do preemptive strikes. Otherwise, we're going to get hit when Israel launches a preemptive war of choice. I mean, who's the superpower? Is the U.S. the superpower, or is Israel the superpower? That's a legitimate question here, I think.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, you bring up nuclear blackmail, but there's also the whole issue of the Epstein files and potential other kinds of blackmail that may have been used, I guess, on Trump specifically. What do you think about that having some impact in all of this?
I think the more I look at the Epstein file, not to ruminate too heavily on it, but I mean it's massive, and it does give people a glimpse of the level of infiltration, corruption, and manipulation throughout our political and financial and corporate system with regards to Israeli influence. But I think Trump was a partner of Epstein more than he was a victim of Epstein's blackmail. If anything, you could say Trump's family is being held hostage by Israel because, Jared Kushner, best friends of the Netanyahu family, is married to his oldest daughter. I mean, that's married to the mob. But then again, what's interesting, if you remember the 2016 election, that Hillary Clinton's daughter, Chelsea, was married to, I believe, Martin Mavinsky, whose father was a convicted felon and a major Zionist. And Trump's daughter is oldest daughter married to Jared Kushner, whose father is a convicted felon and a leading Zionist. So no matter who won the 2016 election, Israel had their dibs already in, and so that we're getting into Game of Thrones territory here. It seems more like 17th century Europe than it does 21st century modern USA, doesn't it? But we're talking about power politics writ large at that level. This is what we're dealing with here. These are major networks, generational networks of power and influence that increase over generations. And the culmination is what we're seeing right now. And so, how far have we advanced as Western civilization in 500 years? I'm going to say maybe not very far, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the overtness of it all is just kind of mind-boggling. And yet we don't, obviously the media is also covering for Israel. The hatred we saw of Trump in his first term from the media seems to have really died down, in my opinion, since he's gotten into a second term, despite the fact that he seems far more dangerous during his second term. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the US media coverage of this, especially, and Western coverage in general? Just they're just not talking about the kind of apocalyptic nature of the way that Israel and the U.S. are attacking Iran right now.
It almost confounds analysis. It defies analysis because if you look at how hard they went against Trump during the last 10 years, on the Russiagate front, on the lawfare, there seemed to be this inexhaustible resourcing to take him down politically or in the legal sense, with all these various lawsuits that kept popping up, and indictments and so forth. So here you have an open goal, an absolutely perfect opportunity. If the Democrats or if the media wanted to take down this president, it'd be very easy to do. I mean, because the public is waiting for that. The independent vote, if you look at the polling, Trump, from where he was when he was inaugurated 13 months ago, the polling on independents, he's gone into negative. I mean, he went from dominating the independents to, that's a swing vote, basically. He would not get elected without them. And he's purged them, and they're never coming back. They will never return to MAGA. So, and you have members of that class in the media. You have members of that class that are represented with certain members of the U.S. government in Washington. So it's not that there aren't, it's not political capital that could be leveraged against Donald Trump. The question is, why the silence? I mean, he's getting a free pass on the most audacious war crimes that we have ever seen, probably in the history of the United States. How is this possible? Where is the Democrats? Where's the Democrat opposition? It should be like a chorus nonstop chorus. I mean, we saw what we saw from 2015, six, even before he was sworn to office. He was being, roundly derided as a fascist and this, and before he even did anything. And now he's actually doing the thing. If you look at ICE, you look at what's happened in Minneapolis, you look at the the militarization, paramilitary force, Praetorian Guard, that is ICE, that domestically, and then you look at internationally, the Venezuela kidnapping of a head of state, running a fake indictment that he was a member of a drug cartel, which the DOJ had to withdraw. And they still have him incarcerated and openly stealing countries' resources and boasting about it, and then blockading Cuba with a military blockade to starve the country, the 90 miles off our coast. I mean, what they're getting away with, where's the opposition? I mean, is it just that the American empire has reached a level of institutional and social and cultural corruption, and political corruption, that we're at peak kind of late stage empire? Is that what it is? I mean, I'm looking for a way to rationalize this, but it's very difficult because if you wanted to, if you really hated Trump, I mean, take your pick right now. It's an open goal. You just have to basically blow and the ball goes in, and nobody's doing it. And is that
Well, some
because of the
Democrats
Israeli
are
lobby?
opposing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Some Democrats are opposing it, Patrick. For example, Tim Kaine in Virginia said they call this openly an illegal war, and they tried to get this vote in the Senate today, and it was defeated. And almost every Democrat voted for it. Only John Fetterman apparently went the other way, but it was the Republicans who voted all for it except Rand Paul, sorry. So there was an attempt for the Senate to do its job and the Congress to pass this War Powers Act, and it didn't happen. And now there's no chance of stopping this thing. That would have been a chance to say that, not that Trump would have obeyed it because he's ignoring court orders, he's ignoring
Yeah.
Congress. It's a disgraceful situation. What really bothers me is the vassal nature of the Europeans. They're going along with this. They're supporting it. The Australians, all the U.S. vassals right now. And you have to look towards Rubio's speech at the Munich conference when he stood up, and I called it the Cecil Rhodes moment, when he talked about, in the words of Cecil Rhodes, that the white man and the European and the Anglo-Saxon needs to run the world, or the Europeans, the way it did. A new imperialism. And we're seeing it right now. They look at Merz in the Oval Office, shaking his head. We have to get rid of this regime in Iran, who's threatening no one, who was a victim of aggression that the Europeans are 100% behind. They stood up and applauded Rubio when he made that speech to European diplomats. This is alive again, the colonial project, and we're seeing it play out right now. On the Epstein thing, I wanted to say something. Our producer, Kathy Vogans, pointed out that whistleblowers sometimes will commit a small crime to prevent a larger crime from happening. Like they'll steal a document and then release that. Well, this seems to be, if in fact Netanyahu has blackmailed Trump with some Epstein material that the Israelis certainly have, because it's pretty clear Epstein was working for the Israelis. I don't think there's any doubt about that. We're not getting into that here. But even if they didn't, they could have hacked that and gotten that. So they've got the unredacted files. And if there's something really bad about Trump in there, they could easily have explained to Trump that this would become public if we didn't get what we wanted, essentially. So that would be, Trump is committing a larger crime to cover up a smaller one, the exact opposite of what the whistleblower does. I think
Yes.
that's a very interesting point now. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, if you have any more, I just wanted to interject with that. Let me talk to you before I ask you. Well, let's do this. The war right now seems to be a race between whether the U.S. and Israel run out of interceptor missiles, or whether Iran runs out of drones and ballistic missiles. Whatever happens first, because if they run out of the interceptors, I mean the U.S. and Israel, that would give unbelievable control over Israeli territory, over the Gulf states, over all U.S. bases in the area. What is your thinking about that? We don't really know how many missiles Iran has. We don't really know how many intercepts there are, but the Washington Post yesterday reported that they were running very low on the interceptors. That's the reason the June war last year ended, because Israel and the U.S. which used a third of their THAAD missiles, and Israel had depleted a huge amount of theirs. They had to stop the war. So this could be days away from them. And they are feverishly trying to destroy the ballistic missiles of Iran. And a U.S. general or a military man today said that 86% of Iran's ballistic missiles have been destroyed. So I don't know whether to believe that or not, obviously. What you're thinking about this race between this missile race seems to be what happened before the ground war with the Kurds. And to me, that's when Israel might think of using their undeclared nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
If
Yeah,
they
no,
are
no.
if they're out of a deceptive and Iran doesn't stop like they did last time. That's the mistake they made last time from a lot of people's point of view in Iran.
Well, this time Iran has said clearly that they're not going to. They'll decide when the war ends. I mean, they're very confident. Like, where's that confidence coming from? And so when I was there, I got a chance to see some of the older missiles. They're of course parading some of them around on the National Day, as well as the Shahed drones and different types of drones. But in terms of the missile tech, it was said to me by an Iranian general with the missile program that what we saw, in June during the so-called 12-day war were older missiles, much older. And maybe the newest ones you saw last summer were 6, 7 years old. So if that's true, I have every reason to believe that's true. The U.S. will never use all of its latest technology in the battlefield because once you deploy it, those missiles can be there's still remnants of the technology after impact, and you can then reverse engineer guidance systems and all. So there is no country, be it China, Russia, the U.S., Iran, that will deploy their best, latest technology for obvious reasons, unless it was absolutely necessary. So what they have is older tech. They do have hypersonic missiles that are, Mach 10 plus, and they have the Pave Tomahawk equivalent, which is a cruise missile. They have many of those. And by the way, these cost a fraction to produce in Iran compared to what the West will pay to produce the equivalent. And when I say equivalent, it is equivalent of what the U.S. have. The U.S. don't have the range of hypersonic missiles that Iran has even. So Iran has all of this native produced missile and drone tech, which they have, to their credit, they started investing in this 20 years ago because if you notice, Iran doesn't have a lot invested in their manned fighter fleets. And it was always like, question, why are they still they have old F-14s, American F-14s from the days of the Shah, but they invested in drone and missile tech, which is specifically designed for what they can afford economically, but also for their Mosaic defense array, which they have. It's the size of continental Europe, Iran, in terms of square miles. So that's a big territory. They have a lot of strategic depth. So they've got a lot going for them in terms of defensive postures and things like that. They can afford to make mistakes and correct them, whereby the U.S. in its position, it's away from its home field. It doesn't have a lot. It has strategic depth in the sense that all of its bases are dotted around in these different locations, but they're being hosted in foreign countries. Israel has zero strategic depth. Israel's strategic depth is Cyprus, is being able to flee and send your F-35s to Cyprus to avoid having them destroyed on the tarmac at Nevatim Air Force Base in Israel. That's or use being lent the U.S. aircraft carrier as an escape hatch for Israeli, and for the president himself will fly away to Greece or to Germany, and so they have no strategic depth, Israel. So they rely on the U.S. and heavily to do that. So Iran can, if it's true and they have the amount of missiles that they say they have, they can fight a war of attrition, because as you said, Joe, once the air defenses are depleted, which can be easily done with drone swarms and lots of different tactics in the first 2 weeks, then the older Scud variants that Iran has, that everybody has seen, those have huge explosive payloads, but they're not as fast and can't do mid-air maneuverability like maybe some of the newer hypersonics, but they have huge damage potential when they impact. Those will be free to be deployed once air defenses have been depleted in Israel and even the U.S. bases. So, and they probably have quite a few of these because they've been stockpiling them for like 30 or 40 years. Okay. After the Iran-Iraq war, this is when Iran went into mobilization in terms of creating a defense for their country, knowing that one day the United States was definitely going to attack them. So every government in Iran, successive government, has expected this is going to happen. They've been planning for it. But so they have waves of different types of missiles and different types of drones that perform different types of roles and functions, and they have a strategy for deploying them. And so, from that point of view, I would say that they have an advantage. The problem is they're going to incur massive human losses because what the U.S. have done is the U.S. have already run out of precision munitions, I estimate, and now they're into gravity bombs. So that's why Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, made a statement saying we're going to rain death and destruction from the sky nonstop on the Iranian people. He said that in a press conference in the last 24 hours. That's just, I mean, that's a violation of every type of war crime and international law imaginable. The U.S. has not done that since Dresden. The allies have not done that, or maybe you could count Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam. But this is seen as the United States does not do that. They do not target densely populated civilian areas arbitrarily. And Pete Hegseth has just committed to doing this, and they are doing it today in Tehran. They're taking out whole city blocks with gravity bombs, high altitude, massive bombs and MOABs and things like that. Not to take out any strategic target, but just to punish and kill their way, thinking they can kill their way to victory. The U.S. has never been able to kill its way to victory, ever. But yet, and that's the Israeli strategy, kill your way to victory. And so we've merged with Israel in our tactics, in our rhetoric, in our modus operandi. Why would a superpower as powerful as the United States need to go down in the gutter? I say that again, and do this types of things that Israel has been doing in full view in Gaza over the last 2 years. It is frankly breathtaking that we're witnessing this. It defies all analysis from the kind of normative position as a superpower. I mean, I can't see China ever doing this, or Russia. And why is the U.S. now engaged in this type of behavior? This portends for a very dark horizon.
Why?
I think.
Did they use a Moab, really, the mother of all bombs? Did they use that?
I don't know if it was the Moab, but we're
Yeah.
talking heavy gravity bombs, which are not precise. They take out city blocks.
Apparently, Morandi, Professor Mohammed Morandi, was on, I think, with the judge earlier today, and he's there, and he says that there were people out in the street protesting, and they have dropped bombs right on them. That's something when I saw the day after the Ayatollah was killed, and you saw those incredible scenes of hundreds of thousands of people in that square.
Yeah.
I said, man, if the Israelis were that sick, they might just start hitting these crowds. But I said, no, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that. And now it looks like they're doing something like that.
They would, yeah. When Hassan Nasrallah had a funeral, they filled the National Football Stadium in Beirut for the funeral of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, and Israeli jets were buzzing that stadium, which had about 50,000 people in it. You know, and there's probably a conversation. At least that's the reports that we heard that this was being mentioned, possibly considered, but maybe it was too early to do such an audacious move like that. But today in 2026, maybe it's more plausible than it was back in 2024. You know, I mean, so I think we're careening into a new area that is, for many of us as analysts and journalists, is virgin territory. We don't have anything to compare it with, not in our lifetimes anyway, which makes it very difficult to try to guess what could or what might happen next. So what you just said, Joe, was horrifying. There was double tap strikes, which Morandi was talking about as well, and so that again, Israeli tactics. If it's not Israel doing the double tap, it's the United States. Will they do the same thing? Probably. I think that back to your original point, Joe, which you talked about the racism. You talked about the Christian, you alluded to we have a problem in America in the U.S. military that's now being kind of unearthed this recently is this Christian nationalism and religious fundamentalism that has been infused into the U.S. military. This is a big problem, and there are a record number of complaints through the due process, whatever mechanisms are in the military, of this type of radical, fanatical Christian Zionism and invoking biblical scripture or one's version or interpretation of eschatological biblical scripture to justify this war, in particular, this war as a holy war. So this is like the Crusades all over again. And if you go to 21st Century Wire, and maybe if you drop a link to this in your YouTube description, we just published a report on Pete Hegseth and this problem of Christian nationalism and neo-crusaderism that is now running rife through the U.S. military command structure. And we've got very good documentation on this. And all roads lead back to, guess where? It leads back to Israel. And Israeli organizations are very involved in fostering and pushing this along through their various Christian Zionist affiliate organizations in America. And it's quite scary, actually, that this is actually a problem in the United States of America, and that there are people ideologically driven, extremist religious fundamentalists that identify, and this is beyond far right, which has a religious element to it, which is quite extraordinary in 2026. But yet that's what we have. So when you see all these purges by Hegseth, what are these purges what have they been about? It's not because the guys may be out of shape, like you said, oh, he was carrying too many extra pounds. No, I think it has more to do with the ideological component. And Pete Hegseth was selected by the Israeli lobby because of his fervent, radical, ideological beliefs. He went to Jerusalem to give a speech calling for the rebuilding of a third temple. That's the head of the Pentagon in 2018. Wow. He was a Fox News weekend host whose highest rank he attained in the U.S. military was major. As a reservist, how is he qualified to lead anything? But he was selected. And when you promote somebody who's not qualified, as grossly underqualified as him, he will do anything and say anything to keep that position because in his mind, he's won the lottery. He got the express elevator up to fame and fortune without having to earn it or do anything. He was a guard at Gitmo. As a, I guess, Minnesota reservist. That was one of his deployments. Did a tour in Afghanistan and Iraq. Never achieved any rank of note in the U.S. military. So how can you put him in charge of a $1.5 trillion military-industrial complex? And he's also religious, and he's got infidel tattooed on, as well as Deutsche Voigt, and all these sort of and the Cross of Jerusalem and so forth. I mean, this is a radical fanatic with infidel tattooed on his thing. So clearly that he's a crusader. He views himself as a crusader. I mean, this is a level of religious fanaticism at the very top of the U.S. military, and this is absolutely encouraged by Trump. I think there's a deep racist component, of course, to all of this, anti-Muslim component, which is, I think, much more dangerous and much more fervent than even the post 9/11 anti-Islamic wave that we all witnessed back in 2001 and 2, that I think created the groundwork and the acceptance or manufactured the consent for the Iraq War two years later. I think we have a much bigger issue because this is now tied into immigration and the hate of immigrants. And so this is another level now in 20 years later that I don't think we can really compare anything with in American and Western history, not in recent years anyway. Maybe if we go back 300 or 400 years, we can have some reference points for this, but that's a very real thing. We have detailed that and very well referenced in our report by a great
I'll
journalist,
post it down there.
Freddie Ponton, put that report together.
I'll
21st
put it
Century Wire.
on the YouTube page. But I mean, this is the worst kind of Orientalism you can imagine. A Western power or powers who don't understand or care anything about Eastern culture, and to the point where they can openly destroy it, physically kill huge numbers of people, take out their religious leader because of a complete misunderstanding. Because what they're aiming at is dominance in the region, Israeli dominance in the region, and U.S. dominance globally. And I'm going to leave that for the end. But I want to say that Hegseth, Trump, Rubio, all these numbskulls are making our job as journalists much easier. Do you remember the arguments you probably went through in the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq about whether oil had anything to do with this or not? And here you have Trump saying, Venezuela, we're going to take the oil. We have Huckabee saying Israel's going to take the whole region. We're seeing U.S. participating in them taking the whole region. We had Trump saying this is regime change. They would never admit that before. So these guys are making it so easy. And now you have, as you're saying, this Christian fundamentalist, insane anti-Islam heart of the motivation of the war as well. This is also being exposed. Now, we don't have any digging to do anymore. They're making our jobs too easy. They're telling us what these guys are doing. Let me ask you about Iran some more, your trip there. How long did you go? What cities did you visit? And what else can you tell us about what you learned about the resolve of these people?
Yeah, I was there through about 3 weeks ago, and I was only there for just under a week because of the security situation. They were under threat. I was fully aware that my trip would be canceled, and I only got confirmation 24 hours before I left. And that's just the nature of the situation there. So I knew that once I was airborne towards Tehran for that leg of my flight, that from Istanbul to Tehran, that once I was airborne, war could break out at any point, and when I got there, the airport could be closed or attacked and by the U.S. and that I'd be stuck there, totally cut off from the U.S. Western financial system, of course, and I would be totally reliant on the hospitality and the goodwill of the people there, of course. But so I was only there, and I was very busy doing media, filming a documentary, as well as doing lots of interviews and reports, which I've released quite a few of those reports on my social media and with 21st Century Wire, with the UK column, who I also report for in the UK. And so I was only in Tehran. I did go outside to see the drones and the missiles. Is probably an hour outside of a couple hours outside of Tehran. But I wanted to go to other cities, but we just didn't have the time, and the window for visiting was very, very brief. But one of the things that we did do is meet with the police officers who were on duty and managing the fallout of the so-called democratic peaceful protests, riots, if you will. And what I saw in terms of their evidence files and the lines of buses and fire trucks that were torched, ambulance that were set on fire, policemen burned alive, 8 of them that I counted, and I saw the unredacted evidence. The redacted evidence was broadcast on Iranian national media. But they wanted international journalists, which were from a number of countries I was traveling with, to see what happened and to know that they were using the crowd as human shields, firing on police in order to get police to fire back. We saw this happen in Syria. We saw it in Ukraine. We saw it in Libya and all these places. So this is a tried and true tactic, which was deployed in order to create this destabilization, and then Trump was trying to leverage that to see some some kind of an uprising and then come in with attacks early. Didn't quite happen. It fizzled out because Iran had shut off the internet and intercepted quite a lot of Starlink terminals as well. But the point is, I got a lot more information about what really happened in January. So I can say without any reservation, without any shadow of a doubt, that the narrative that Iran was massacring protesters and they killed, tens of thousands is a lie. It's a complete fabrication. 100% fabricated. Yeah.
No,
So
just what I was saying before about how they openly say things. Bessant, the Treasury Secretary, said it in Davos that we collapsed the currency so people would go out on the streets. Mike
that's right.
Pompeo said, welcome the Mossad agents marching together with the. They're openly, you don't need to prove it. They're telling us that this
Yeah.
was not a. I'm not saying there's no protests in Iran and there's not discontent. There is in every society, but that this was an organized uprising by U.S. and Israel. They
But Joe,
admitted
you
it.
say that.
Trump
You say
said,
that.
take over your institutions. Take over your
But
institutions. Sorry.
Joe, you say that, and it makes perfect sense what you say. But I say that to my cohort in America, and they say, "Well, Patrick, that's just your opinion.
Yeah,
That's just your
I know.
opinion." And I will repeat everything you said, Joe. Like it was just factual. It's checkable. We can go to their social media accounts. Scott Bessett said it on camera,
Yep.
not once but twice,
Yep.
and they'll just say, "Patrick, that's not true. That's just your opinion." And in
Yeah.
fact, you're a shill for the regime, actually.
That's it. Yeah.
That's the kind of polarized kind of media political environment that we are in right now, where people are not interested. A lot of people in America and in Britain and Europe are not interested in the truth. Certainly, the political class not interested, and a large number of the media class. Shame on the media. For not wanting to pursue the facts. If you just take the casualty claims of the so-called massacre of protesters in Iran, every single one of these originates from a U.S.-based Iranian human rights NGO in New York, Washington, D.C., or
Yeah.
Toronto or something. And then Iran International News is not based in Iran. It is a Western-based website that is a known clearinghouse for Israeli propaganda, and even Israeli intelligence officials have admitted that on record. And Google gives it first top search results. If you type in Iran International News will be, how do you get that level of placement at Google?
Mm.
And so that they're above everybody. So they come up with the outlandish claims. These are laundered through our political class in the speeches of our politicians, and then suddenly it becomes de facto history. And then that's used to manufacture consent for the war. Because the reason that's important, and I think this is an important point here, Joe and Elizabeth, is because even if you're against the regime change war, as the sort of MAGA talking point, no more regime change wars, if you believe that the supreme leader is massacring tens of thousands of civilians, then you might be against the unnecessary regime change war. But if it goes and happens anyway, you'll say, well, at least we got rid of the dictator because he was killing his own people. And that's the
Ah,
same exact
yeah.
logic that was applied to Saddam. It was the same exact logic applied to Bashar al-Assad, to Muammar Gaddafi, to Slobodan Milosevic, and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
this is
They're all Hitler too, by the way.
very important part of the war strategy. It can't
Yeah.
not you cannot underestimate the importance of that moral accusation, that crime that's been invented. It's so important for manufacturing consent for the war. It's essential, actually. They needed that. That's about all they have, actually, in the background, because none of the other stuff holds water. You can't even pretend the nuclear charge holds water. But that actually works in the West still.
Yeah. Maybe you can't answer this, but why does it work? Why is it so easy now to manufacture consent? Why did 20 years ago they had to hide that it was about oil, that it was about regime change? They always had to lie about these things. And now they're saying it openly. And yet, as you just pointed out, Americans are still supporting this to some extent, although I thought they opposed. There was a big poll that Americans opposed this war. So I'm not clear about that. I'm not in the U.S. right now. I'm not watching U.S. television. I wonder how the media, if it's the same jingoistic patriotism and flag waving that we saw in the invasion of Iraq in 2003, which made you vomit when you watched Fox News, all the channels there. I don't know what's going on. Why is there still, as you say, at least some support or belief in these open lies when they're telling us the truth openly?
I think because a lot of those lies, certainly the false flag or the chemical weapons canard, these are spent forces in terms of propaganda. They've been used so many
Mm.
times and exposed by journalists like us, like our colleagues out in the independent media, especially even mainstream journalists. You can give some credit for that too. So it's a narrative that has been completely wrung out like an old dish rag. There's nothing left in there. And so the color revolution as well has been, they've used that, they've deployed that very effectively, and but they've also failed in deploying color revolutions too, because now countries are evicting U.S. National Endowment for Democracy, Open Society, NGOs out of Eastern Europe, and countries like Egypt, countries like Belarus, a number of Eastern European countries have just kicked them all out because they know that they're there to foment and develop opposition fifth columns and then deploy them against the government whenever they're not playing the dancing to the tune of the United States or NATO on this. So in a way, that's what we call smart power, soft power being media propaganda, smart power being NGO operationalized fifth columns, like was used with Yugoslavia, like was deployed in the Arab Spring, like is used in all these different countries. Those have actually been disposed. They don't have the ability. That's one of the reasons why USAID had to be pared down and many of these programs wound down, because they've just been completely exposed, and people in these target countries know that this is subterfuge. And Ukraine
Mm.
has also been a big epiphany on this front as well. So that's one of the reasons. And so I think maybe, Joe, we've come to U.S. led empire has come to the end of the line on a lot of these tactics, and because of the proliferation of media, social media, the amount of intelligent analysts that are exposing all of this constantly 24/7, there's just no way that they can get saturation on some of these narratives. So now we're to the point where the machine's saying, well, let's not even bother trying to do any of these elaborate facades that we're going to construct, and we're just going to go full in hard power and to hell with it. And what are you going to do to stop us, kind of thing? And Trump is the ultimate avatar for that type of approach, if you think about it, because he's pretty unscrupulous, pretty immoral. I probably think he would be, probably an atheist, and yeah, he would have no problem as a tool for this. But this is a dangerous moment in history too, because we know what the risks are, which we spoke about earlier, which is this could very easily careen into a regional war, which it already is becoming a regional war, and it could turn into a nuclear exchange with great powers being dragged in to protect their interests. So Trump
Well, but
is,
Trump said, yeah.
yeah,
Trump
go
ran
ahead.
against forever wars, but the other day he said wars can be fought forever. I don't know if you saw that quote when we have enough ammunition everywhere. These wars can be fought forever. You say regional war? What about the U.S. sinking with a submarine torpedo an Iranian ship in international waters near Sri Lanka?
Yeah.
It's not just a regional war now, is it? That's out of
What
the
type of
region.
ship was it? Was it a merchant navy
The
ship, or
frigate.
was it
It was a
a
frigate, a
military
Navy
frigate?
frigate.
Okay, a navy frigate.
Apparently,
Yeah,
well, I don't know
and
what
they
its
did
mission was there. I don't know why it was. It could have been accompanying commercial Iranian ships as escort.
probably.
That's normally what a frigate does. What probably would be doing there. I don't know for sure. But they sunk it with a submarine. These
Mm.
It's insanity. This is
Well,
going
you're
off the
inviting.
rails quick.
What's to stop Russia from coming in with some of
Well,
their
that's a whole
submarines?
nother topic. Let's
They
talk
have
about that.
nuclear submarines, and they would be within their right at that point to intervene on their interests. And also, it means that the U.S. Navy is now fair game anywhere in the world. If this is the way, and by the way, the report suggests that the United States let the survivors drown, and they didn't even make any
Oh,
attempt to rescue them. We'll see if that's the case or not. It seems to be the case. But even in World War II, Nazi people or Japanese Imperial Navy were rescuing their enemies in sinking ships, maybe take them prisoner or whatever, but at least they were duty bound to rescue them. That's gone. So there is no expectation of any morals or norms with this U.S. administration. It's a rogue. This is a rogue government. This is a rogue. America has become that rogue state that everybody feared that it would under the Trump presidency, and his popularity rating is plummeting, by the way, and he will not recover. There's nothing he can do. This is do or die for this administration. You know,
So you brought
and
up Russia, and yeah, well, let's just talk about the BRICS. This is a war against BRICS, I think, and Iran is in the front line right now. If Iran is defeated, it's a huge blow to BRICS. There goes the eye from the BRICS, right? Or India
Mhm.
is the eye, but it is now a full-fledged member of BRICS. And I think that the U.S. realizing that they are losing this battle of our age between their unilateral and unipolar power, and a multipolar world where there's a balance of power amongst the other countries. And the U.S. does not want to be obviously a responsible player and just in the world. It wants to dominate everybody else. This war is really that consequential, I think. And I have to say, a lot of our colleagues that are being interviewed on programs nonstop, and you were on a couple of them yourself. They're saying openly that there's no way the U.S. is going to win this war. Iran has already won this war, and I wonder about that. I'm worried. I don't think that we know who's going to win this war. I think we have to be honest and
I
say
agree.
this is not. I think obviously the U.S. could lose and Israel could lose, and that could lead to the nuclear response by Israel. So in a way, maybe we want Israel to win. I'm just putting that out there. But you agree with me. We don't know who's going to win this war. They could overwhelm Iran and
Yeah,
knock out so much of Iran's government and infrastructure that they could walk into a ruined country. But there'll be
yeah.
civil war then. But anyway, you agree that we don't know who's going to win this war, do we?
I think it's a mistake to make any categorical declarations regarding who's going to win and who's going to lose. The balance of power is on the side of the United States and Israel, 100%. Iran has a lot of resources. They have the ability to defend themselves extremely well with what they have, but it's still nothing in comparison. And if you add the nuclear element there on the back end to save face or to put a cap on a long, painful conflict, that also, basically confounds any conventional war analysis that, like a lot of our pundits, colleagues like you were mentioning, are talking about conventional analysis of conventional warfare. But this could go into unconventional warfare very easily, and because if look. I took history, Joe. I have a master's in international relations at from a good British university. I've done postgraduate work in diplomacy and international security, but I listened during history, and the justification the United States had for dropping an A-bomb on Japan, and this was drilled into our heads, Joe, and you know it very well, was to prevent a longer war and save American soldiers' lives. I mean, that's what we're told as the justification for dropping the A-bomb. So the same exact justification could be used if this war stretches too long for the likings of the American public and the political economy in the United States or the West. So I would not rule it out, absolutely. But what's important here is I can say categorically that the United States will lose on the public relations front, and it will lose in terms of its previously held position as a perceived possible honest broker in the international system, as a normative power, as a trusted authority in the international system. I can say categorically that they have lost, and they will lose more the longer this war goes on with this particular president in power. There's no doubt about that. And the problem is when you listen to the Munich Security Conference and you listen to these kind of Johnny-come-lately pundits of international relations like Marco Rubio, who didn't have a coherent or an interesting thing to say about any of this stuff more than 12 months ago. Okay, they J.D. Vance, who's 41 or 42 years old, who knows nothing about anything, and they say that America is getting ripped off by providing defense for all these countries, and we've had enough. America, you've heard this speech, right? America is ripping off Europe. America has been ripping off Europe since the Second World War and using Europe to prop up the US dollar as a world reserve currency with euro dollars, and using the Arabs with the petrodollar to prop up the US dollar so that we can deficit spend $2.5 trillion a year, and that pays for our huge military, which we go to enforce and open markets and steal resources and do all this stuff. That's all paid for by the largesse of having a global reserve currency with an artificial demand for US dollars to buy and sell in various commodities and goods, liquid form of transaction settlement and arbitrage. That's the US dollar. And that only exists because of the cooperation and the trust that we have with our various allies and other countries around the world. That's where US power is. It's not from the US military, it's financial preponderance, which is backed by military preponderance that only exists because of all these multilateral institutions that we helped construct after the Second World War. That is the source of U.S. power. It's the network of countries with the U.S. at the top, but through all the institutions, through cooperation, pretending at least to have good relations and to cooperate with all of these different countries, to pretending to engage in real diplomacy. All that stuff is the source of U.S. power in the international system. Without that, they would have fled the dollar a long time ago, Joe. They would have fled the dollar a long time ago. But now you see they're fleeing now. So I think that they've got that's completely wrong, and so this is going to hurt the U.S. I think this Iran war will accelerate BRICS. I think it will accelerate a move out of the U.S. dollar, and this government's being very aggressive in attacking people with tariffs, using financial warfare instruments, tariffs like sanctions. Basically, they've sanctionized tariffs and sanctions as well, and other economic warfare, and outright theft, actually piracy and stealing land or resources, a la Venezuela or Greenland as well. And so that is going to ultimately kill the United States. They killing the goose that lays its golden egg, and that golden egg is the U.S. dollar, the demand for it in the international system. Even Europeans are divesting pension funds in Denmark and Sweden. They slowly, gradually, countries are pulling out because of the Greenland issue, but also because of other issues as well. And the dollar is not seen as a safe, stable, safe haven anymore. It could be weaponized at any moment if you get on the wrong side of this administration. So, I mean, that's the lecture I would give to Trump's cabinet if they were interested. That's the source of U.S. power. So you can do all this performative bluster at the Munich Security Conference and wag your finger at the Europeans, but those Europeans are subsidizing your imperial largesse. And that's the truth of it. And that's what I did my master's thesis on, by the way. So I do know that topic very well.
So you must be aware then from the 1980s, Donald Trump, who was, I grew up in New York City, so he was on the front pages of the tabloids every day about his latest girlfriend and whatnot, a boasting, absolutely uninteresting person. But he kept saying, they're eating our lunch. In those days, it was the Japanese were buying a lot of real estate in New York. So they're eating our lunch. We're taking. This is the same old bullshit that this guy's been talking about for 40 years. Now you're telling me this when it was and you say the Marshall Plan was for American business. That wasn't just to help Europe. It was all about U.S. dominance in Europe. Let's face it. But they palm it off like how good we were to help the poor Europeans recover after this war with nothing to do with our interests. I mean, please. Patrick, I am psychologically preparing myself for seeing a headline saying that a nuclear device has been deployed by Israel in Isfahan or something like that, the nuclear reactor there, something like that. Maybe not in the heart of Tehran, but I'm really ready for that. I'm not going to be surprised now. Because if they're going to go down, and the U.S. too, if the U.S. is going to go down, if they really could lose this war, and as we said, we don't know who's going to win this war, and they could lose this war. Iran could win this war when they run out of the missiles, and then they really start hitting them hard, Tel Aviv, all the U.S. bases, and hitting the civilian targets in the Gulf countries. And some people criticize that, and I understand that, and I think that there's questionable to do that. But I think see if you agree with me, they are hitting not only the U.S. bases in those countries where the attacks are coming from. They have total, absolute, legitimate, under Article 51 of the UN Charter, right to defend themselves by hitting the places where it's coming from. That's not,
That's right.
and of course we saw at the UN Security Council, Iran is being condemned for these attacks. They're fighting back against the bases, but they're also hitting, and they sent, a drone near the Burj Khalifa. I don't know if it was intending to hit the tallest building in the world in Dubai,
Mm.
and they're hitting downtown places in Abu Dhabi, in Doha, etc. I think they're trying to say to these countries, make it so painful that they're going to tell the U.S. These countries will tell the U.S. stop. They want the U.S. to stop this war. Iran wants the U.S. and Israel to stop attacking them. So you hit everything you can to make it as painful for the other side. So that's why I think they're hitting some civilian targets, not just the military. What do you think of that?
Well, there's another aspect to this, Joe, that's even more disturbing, which is in the fog of war. And Tucker Carlson, you probably saw, he brought up this accusation that in Qatar and in Saudi Arabia, Iran said it's not targeting Aramco oil facilities, and yet those were hit. But nobody can confirm where the attack came from. And the accusation that's being leveled is that Israel is engaged in false flags to try to set the Saudis against the Iranians, and of course, and beg the United States for more protection and so forth. And so similar accusations with regards to some of the drones that were hit in Cyprus. And these are not been confirmed. Some of these, especially the oil targets, is Iran's official position very, very adamant they are not targeting Saudi's oil facilities or Qatar, the energy infrastructure. And it makes sense why they would say that. Obviously, closing the Straits of Hormuz is one thing, but attacking Aramco facilities and so forth directly is another, because then it opens up Iran to reciprocal attacks, which of course they don't want, because nobody wants to open that Pandora's box. So Israel is quite happy, perhaps, and we need to do more. I need to do more follow up on to track more of the Arab reporting on this. But are there any investigations from the Saudi authorities? Have there been any arrests of Mossad agents? Certainly, in that situation, the United States would intervene diplomatically immediately to diffuse it and get people released. But this is the environment we're in here, Joe. This is the environment. Israel can run amok, and including false flags against U.S. naval assets. I would not put that past the Israelis, quite frankly, because they did it before in the Six-Day War. They attacked the USS Liberty to blame it on Egypt in order to draw the United States deeper into that conflict. So they actually have they have form. They have they have pedigree for that. So I would not put that past the Israelis at all. They lie. They're deceitful. They play dirty, and their main objective is to manipulate the United States, like the Ukrainians, by the way. Look how much they've manipulated the U.S. By attacking and sabotaging negotiations, and in order to bring things back to zero when advances had been made in terms of diplomacy. So it's the same thing here. It's not in Israel's interest to see the Gulf countries somehow wanting to talk to the Iranians to try to get a resolution to some of this. That's not in Israel's interest at all. They want the opposite, and they might play a role in it, it being an incendiary element in making that happen. So that's something that we need to keep a very close eye on.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Ukraine because, first of all, Zelensky has been in touch with the GCC heads of government there, and he's giving his support completely to them and against the Iranians. He's so anti. He's just joining in this chorus of people are engaging in this aggression. And I wonder if the oil situation continues to be as bad as it's going to be, if the straits remain closed. Will the Europeans be forced to, this is something Scott Riddett said on one of our programs earlier this week, last Saturday, will the Europeans be forced to have to buy Russian oil and gas if they can't get it from the Gulf anymore? And what did that mean? Right? And are these the Ukraine is going to get less munitions probably if they have to use them all up in Iran. So how does this affect the Ukraine war and the Europeans?
Well, Zelensky definitely would like this to be swift and fast and over
Yeah,
with America
right.
winning, in order to redeploy what he wants, for his to keep his war going. But that aside, on the oil and gas front, that's actually that on one level, it's a pretty straightforward assessment at the moment that the Straits of Hormuz is effectively partially shut and could be completely shut. Qatar has also stopped production of LNG. And what's important isn't necessarily the oil on this equation. What's more important is the gas, because Qatar is one of the main suppliers to the European southern energy infrastructure. And so LNG at conversion terminals, and it makes its way into the pipelines to power Europe. The United States, now, if the Straits of Hormuz are closed, then that supply is going to be halted. So, and it's already drying up. They have probably some reserves right now, which probably have a finite timetable in terms of how much reserves on the European end there'll be, and Qatar will also might have some reserves stored in different places. But the U.S., this is a bumper market for U.S. LNG. So once again, this could bail out the
Yeah.
fracking industry once again, because the U.S. has a monopoly on the northern supply terminals for the European, a near monopoly. The Norway has a bit, but mainly it's overpriced U.S. fracked LNG coming after the magical sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. So for U.S. oil and for U.S. gas, this is a boon. There's no doubt about that. And one has to ask the question, Joe, that if I could see this weeks in advance, and that my colleagues who are day traders, we were talking about this for the last month, that Howard Lutnick and the Wall Street titans and Trump's inner circle, how many of them have been putting bets down,
Oh,
which is very predictable, that easily that Brent crude, it's at 80 right now. Futures call by the end of the week. We're talking 90, 100 calls by next week if this thing keeps up. End of next week, you're talking about calls potentially upwards of $130 per barrel. Not that we haven't seen it before. We have seen it before in 2008 and 2009. So it is possible. It has happened before. It will happen here. They've made tons of money, I'm sure. And actually, there are reports now where people are pointing the finger at Trump administration inner circles and his coterie that have been profiting off this. It's a very easy one, by the way, with oil and gas and laying bets down. It's like printing money, basically. If you know there's going to be a war and you know that strait's going to close, and it seems like the United States is doing everything possible to accelerate that outcome. So it's good for the oil and gas business. It's good for Wall Street. It's good for Howard Lutnick and his crew and Trump's inner circle and Don Jr. and the stablecoin mafia. It's great for them. For us, it's inflation. It's going to mean inflation. So I think that would be the basis of any future congressional inquiry or criminal investigation. I would go straight to look at the records, the business records and trading records of all these people during this period, because I think it would be very revealing, quite frankly.
great for a small number of people. Small
Yes.
number of people, even in Israel, and small number of people in Europe, and who operate in the world as if they are the world, and what's good for them is going to be good for everybody else, or don't care about the suffering that's caused in their pursuit of success. And I think this is what I learned growing up in America. This is the thing that I and many young people in those days in the 70s objected to, was this idea that in order to succeed, we had to hurt other people. You didn't have to care about what your consequences of your behavior was to other people. Don't worry about that. Just keep your eye on your goal and forget about that there was something wrong with you if you even cared about, well, wait a minute, I don't want to, it doesn't mean that much to me, to make that kind of money if it's going to hurt people. So this is the mentality of the groups of people running these governments. They care what's good for them. But someday we're seeing it happen in front of our eyes. How many people are going to suffer from this? And again, it could lead to the worst possible disaster if nuclear. Now, if they used, I don't know how much you know about nuclear weapons, but if they used a tactical nuke in Iran, how much radiation would that create? Would it blow back to Israel? Could it stop with just one and not escalate into an all-out nuclear war that involves China and Russia?
Yeah, a tactical low yield nuclear device would not have a big radiation
Right.
signature to it. So that would be probably the most likely deployment. Strategic would the size of Iran and so forth, a single device strategic thermonuclear weapon may have some kind of a radiation component to it, but it might not be anything more or anything that's more than what's been allowable in terms of nuclear testing, for instance, in the South Pacific, and so forth. And there's probably, in a very cynical way, people in America couldn't care less about that because they believe it wouldn't affect them anyway. People in Europe maybe slightly more concerned. People in the Middle East, a lot more concerned, I would think. But does Israel really care? They probably wait for the op. They're probably wargaming that now as we speak, including looking at weather patterns and things like that. If I'm sure this is being wargamed.
Yeah.
So it's then if that's a risk, if that's a serious consideration, then it would be tactical low yield nuclear weapons in
Yeah.
order to make a statement. And
Yes.
that would mean civilian loss of civilian life, perhaps, if they use it around a population center or so forth. But I would not put anything past these people at this point because they
No.
have shown that they have no restraint when it comes to civilian life.
That would be psychological warfare in a way. That was crossed. That line was crossed. A nuclear weapon was used, even if it's a small tactical one with a low radiation yield. It would only be the second time after Hiroshima and Nagasaki that a nuclear weapon was used, and what the effect would be on the whole region and the world is something that we would have to behold. But again, I do not put that past them. Now you said that Iran was preparing 40 years for this war, right? So you'd have to
Yeah.
think the Pentagon was wargaming this for 40 years too, and that other
Hmm.
presidents knew how they mapped out what would happen, and we're seeing it happen. That Iran would
Hmm.
hit the bases of the region, they would hit the Gulf Arab centers, population centers, maybe that they would hit Israel with everything they had, and that they would close the Strait of Hormuz. This was all mapped out. And again, going back to the very first question to end our discussion, Patrick, and I really appreciate the 2 hours you've given us, is the other presidents knew what that war game was, and they didn't do it, even though Bibi, that he wanted for 40 years for this to happen. Um, and now it's happening. So what made Trump do this? What made him finally pull the trigger here when he knew that this could be an utter, absolute disaster for his presidency, for his legacy, for him? I don't get it. I don't get why he did it where other presidents would not go down this road.
You might be giving him more credit than he probably deserves in terms of his ability of self-awareness and reflection, Joe. I don't think
Ha,
Donald Trump has that depth. He doesn't think past the length of his nose most of the time, I'm not saying that flippantly, by the way. I really believe that's the case. This is a first president that's functionally illiterate in U.S. history. So this is not a philosopher king or any kind of a scholar and a gentleman. This is somebody who avoids reading anything, who is reported to hate reading, and likes to be told things, but in 1 minute sort of packages. And anything more than a minute or a minute and a half in terms of analysis is too much for him. And he gets very visibly upset and agitated and doesn't want to hear that. So, I mean, it's a kind of a nightmare if you think about it. But the difference is, we talked about the nuclear weapons. Okay, that's a separate conversation. Why is this different? Why is the situation different than before? And why? Because they did war game this out, Joe. The Rand Corporation, other think tanks of U.S. military has war game, and the results from those war games, specifically with Iran over the years, has been very negative outcome for the United States should they decide to pursue a full scale war with Iran. So what's different about when those war games were done and today is a lot of those war games were done under the sort of expectation that there were limits to what the military would do in terms of inflicting civilian casualties. And from the U.S. point of view, certainly that's always been a variable that has been controlled when we game out these scenarios. In 2026, however, those restraints have been removed, certainly from the Israeli side, but I believe as well from the United States side too. I believe that they're becoming it's less and less of a restraint. And so if you take that away, then the wargaming changes. And so it defies modern warfare analysis because we've always had this expectation of restraint when it came to killing civilians. But there's no longer any expectation of restraint in that category, conventionally anyway, with Israel, and also I think to an increasing degree with the United States. So that means you can do more militarily if you don't have to worry about that pesky problem of killing civilians.
Yeah.
And so that to me that's the difference today than 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. That to me is the difference. But the U.S. has done that in the past. I mean, again, we talked about Hiroshima and Nagasaki,
Of course.
and we talked about other Dresden and Cambodia,
Yes.
Laos, and Kissinger's campaign in Southeast Asia. So the U.S. has, and Korea, by the way, this is something that's not
Oh,
talked about, the leveling of Pyongyang as well. So the U.S. does have this history of descending into this dark sort of pit of inflicting civilian casualties on their perceived enemy. And so
yeah.
that's why I would say this is very difficult to war game out when you remove that restraining factor. It's very, very difficult. And that gets back to our other point, Joe, which you said, that you can't categorically predict who's going to be the quote winner
Yeah.
of this military conflict. And this could very easy. It's invariably going to draw in other powers. I think that's, unfortunately, I'm going to say that's inevitable now.
You mean
Which
beyond
powers?
just beyond just supplying weapons or material, intelligence, satellite? They're really doing that. I think the
Yeah,
Russians and maybe the Chinese, of course, fuel, whatever they
yeah,
need, but actually direct participation
yes.
of Russia
Pakistan
is possible, or
of
Pakistan. Yeah.
Pakistan,
Wow.
and that brings in India, uh, and that brings in it ups the ante with Russia, and certainly that invites China as well. So I mean that to me is not out of the realms of possibility at all. I mean, if Azerbaijan gets drawn in, then Russia is automatically drawn in at
Hmm.
that point, or Armenia for that matter. Armenia has been playing very fast and loose with their relationship with the U.S. military, by the way, and
Hmm.
are made, I think, a fundamental, huge, grave error by allowing them to be used as a lily pad for the U.S. military. So if that situation starts to fester, then that will also draw in Turkey and Russia potentially as well. Turkey is a bona fide mid-tier power in the region.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. They
if
don't remember. They
Turkey,
tried to hit the NATO base today, by the way.
yeah,
There was
in Incirlik,
it was
yeah,
in Silic, yeah. Iran
yeah.
did, and it was sent down, it was shut down by inception. So what about
Mm.
Pakistan? Could they send a message through diplomatic channels to Tel Aviv that if you even think about a nuclear weapon in this conflict, and we have them too, by the way, could they?
Well, it wouldn't be so much that, but it would be Pakistan offering some level of military support or protection
Hmm.
for Tehran. They have a fraternal history and a bond, Islamic bond as well. And Pakistan is very much like Iran in terms of it's a successful kind of political Islam nationalist
Right.
movement, and so they share blood relations. So many Pakistanis in Iran and half Pakistanis and vice versa. A lot of Iranians in Pakistan as well. So and then there's the war between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which India is also fueling from the back end, and I'm sure the U.S. are deeply involved in that, as is Israel. as well. Israel's already identified Pakistan as an existential threat in the future that needs to be denuclearized. So
Oh, I
just
see.
on that basis alone, it's a potentially an existential issue for Pakistan, the fate of Tehran. So I mean, so there's a number of reasons there to say that if things continue to escalate and down the road, you could have some of those situations emerging. And Iraq, by the way, Iraq, none of this can happen without Iraq. Iraq, there's no invasion of Iran. There's nothing possible. No air attacks without somehow bypassing or subduing Iraq. And it's still very important. And they have a Shiite affinity with Iran, and that's something that you cannot. And very committed, very committed. The Ayatollah al-Sistani,
Yeah.
major geopolitical figure that's quiet most of the time, but when it comes to mobilize, as they showed during the summer of 2014 with ISIS, they will mobilize and they will be effective, and they were. So that's something that people should be very aware of as well.
Yeah, it's the Shia fighting against Sunni terrorism and being a defensive militant groups, not terrorist group. Pakistan has a 15% Shia population, so they have to deal with that too. That's sizable,
That's
the
right.
Pakistanis. So what you're saying is a return to full-on barbarism by the United States, which has been apparent in U.S. history, from Native Americans to the Filipinos in the 19th century, the massacres there by the United States, to, yes, Hiroshima and Nagasaki being the absolute worst, and Dresden, where they don't care about civilians. And we've now come back to that state under Donald Trump. Good going, Donald Trump. Patrick Henningsen, if you have any further thoughts you'd like to add, otherwise, I wish you a good evening. And I thank you very
Yeah.
much for spending all the time with us. And we will keep our eyes on this, and maybe hopefully we'll invite you back again as this thing
Yeah.
develops and
No,
continues
it's
to
been a
go off the rails.
great conversation. I thought it was very good conversation, and with you and Elizabeth. And yeah, well, let's hope that some of these issues get elevated up into the national conversation more, and we just have we're having serious debates in this country about what's going on. So that's the hope.
Very good, Patrick. Very good to hook up with you since the Assange days in London when
Yes.
we met many times. Thank you again. So I'm going to sign off for Kathy Vogan, our producer, for Elizabeth Voss, my co-host, and I thank the audience for joining us tonight with Patrick Henningsen to talk about the Mideast on fire. For CN Live, this is Joe Lauria. Goodbye.
Get out your notebook. There's more.
If you are a consumer of independent news, then the first place you should be going to is Consortium News, and please do try to support them when you can. It doesn't have its articles behind a paywall. It's free for everyone. It's one of the best news sites out there, and it's been in the business of independent journalism and adversarial independent journalism for over 2 decades. I hope that with the public's continuing support of Consortium News, it will continue for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.